And welcome everybody. Much like Roger, I'm feeling the middle-aged whiteness of myself as Natasha issues the invite to bring inclusivity back into the space. I do believe that kind of chippy northerner is not yet a protected class, so I can't even go on that one. But I do hope that our speakers will get us there by the end of the series of presentations that we've got. So session 6, mobilising equitable management, and the only thing that stands in between you and the final excellent keynote speaker. We will be talking about how we mobilise engagement in strategic marine resource management and choose between priorities, as Natasha said. We've got a great set of speakers to help us with this. We are not grappling with this alone. So from the MMO, talking about English marine plans, we've got country perspectives. We go regional with the Orkney Islands Council. Before we kind of come into more sectoral-based issues, so we've got fisheries, we've got offshore wind, we've got space for nature. So we are interdisciplinary, we are boundary crossing, and we very much hope that we can grapple with some of the really difficult issues across this space during this session. So a bit of a journey across scales and geographies. I've loved the breadth of geography that we've covered already, and without further ado, I shall start right here in England and introduce to you Rachel Brown from the MMO, who's going to talk to us about English marine plans, next generation. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi everyone, I've got the beginning of the graveyard shift, so thank you very much for all sticking around to hear us. I'm hoping myself and my colleagues are going to give you a good show. No singing or dancing though. So I also hope some of you are Star Trek fans and get the title that I used there, but we are in England about to start the next generation of marine planning. And the cup is much more than half full, so I'm not going to bore you too much with legislation, but I've been reflecting on a lot of the things that have been mentioned throughout the last 2 days of the conference. And I just want to point out a few things to you there. So we have the Marine and Coastal Access Act from 2009, and that sets the legislative basis for marine planning within England. And underneath that is a document, a policy statement called the UK Marine Policy Statement. I can't really see a lot of you, but how many people have read it? Quite a few, about a third to half of the room. It's not all of you, though. So the UK Marine Policy Statement is interesting for 2 reasons. One, it's UK level. So it was an agreement between devolved administrations and England that we were going to have shared priorities for the marine environment. The second thing that's interesting about it is it's cross-departmental. So every single marine interest, every government department across Whitehall signed off on the Marine Policy Statement back in 2011. And it actually forms the basis, the statutory basis of the UK marine planning system. And I just want to read some of the high-level marine objectives that were in the Marine Policy Statement and are still relevant to us today and we should still be applying. The first, biodiversity is protected, conserved, and where appropriate, loss has been halted and restored. All of those who have a stake in the marine environment have an input with associated decision-making. The precautionary principle is applied consistently across the UK, and there is equitable access to those who want to enjoy the coast and seas. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. And in England, we took a regional approach to marine planning. So we took the Marine Policy Statement and we developed marine plans that were place-based. And you can see in bright colours behind me the different regions that we planned in. So there are 11 marine planning regions and 6 marine plans. Everywhere apart from the southeast has an offshore marine plan area. And the remit of marine planning runs from mean high water springs out to the continental limit, the territorial limit, and they overlap with terrestrial planning. So there's a deliberate overlap in the intertidal, which has pros and cons, happy to discuss that afterwards, but it does mean that there is a connection between land and sea. We probably could do better, but that's what we've got right now. And then importantly, marine plans are applied by every relevant public body. So it's not just the MMO that makes decisions in the marine area, and that's important. So to talk about the next generation, one must talk a little bit about what we've done to date. And when I say we, I don't just mean the MMO. because marine planning is a participatory process. It's required a lot of you in this room to engage over more than a decade. It has required some tough conversations with stakeholders within plan areas, and it has required tough conversations across government, because not one single one of these marine plans is signed off and goes to the Secretary of State for the Environment until it's been signed off by every relevant department. And so after the Act and the Marine Policy Statement in 2014, we had the first ever UK Marine Plan, which was done in the East. And we learnt a lot. We were learning while we were doing, and there were lots of things that we couldn't trial that we wanted to. Fast forward, 2018 was the South, and then we developed the 4 remaining marine plans for England, and they were published and adopted in 2021. But that's not all. We've reported on our marine plans. So we've monitored them, we've looked at how they've been effective or ineffective in the marine plan area, and we've produced reports. There have been 3. So we're required to report no less than every 3 years after a plan's been adopted. And for the East, we've had 2017, 2020, 2023, and in both 2020 and 2023, we recommended that the East be replaced. And the Secretary of State accepted that both times. So coming up this year, we've got the second report for the South, and we've got the first report for those 4 plans that were adopted in 2021. And at the centre of all of this, and it can't be an MMO marine planning talk without the marine planning wheel in the bottom, I'm afraid, but at the centre of all of this, if you look in the middle of the wheel, it doesn't matter what stage we're talking about, stakeholder engagement and evidence are key to everything that we do, as well as the humility to learn lessons from what we didn't do well. We've also done implementation, because a plan is not just for Christmas. It's no use if it sits on a shelf, and we don't learn anything if no one uses it. And as I already said, the MMO are not the only decision maker in the marine environment. So that top diagram on the top left is I know you maybe can't see the details, but each bar represents a different organisation or group of organisations that has jurisdiction in the marine environment in England. At least 6 of those are decision makers. The Environment Agency, every single coastal local authority, the MMO, harbour authorities, IFCAs, Natural England, the Environment Agency. And so they all have their own decision-making processes, and we need to be able to support them in implementing the marine plans within those decision-making processes. So we've produced guides, there are examples. If you find yourself at the bottom of YouTube one night, you can go on the MMO YouTube channel and you can watch one of our training sessions that my team has... Hey, they're not that bad. You can listen to the implementation training sessions, and if you're thinking about using the marine plans, it might be worth listening to those implementation training sessions. We also developed a digital tool called Explore Marine Plans, which has just had an update, so please don't all navigate to it right now in case it crashes. We've just soft launched it. But Explore Marine Plans allows applicants and decision makers to go online and spatially look at which policies are relevant to their application or their decision. So we've done a lot, and we've learnt a lot. And I could talk for about an hour about all of the things that we've learnt, but I probably only have about 3 minutes left. There we go. So what next? Well, we've heard over the last 2 days all of the things that are coming next in the environmental sector. But we also have all of the other departments to think about. And here is just an example of a couple of things. How many of you have read the Windsor Review? I can see maybe 5 hands. You should. The Windsor Review was published at the end of last year, and the section on marine planning, I think I can be bold enough to say, was perhaps written as someone who wasn't familiar with the marine planning system, because it required a strategic spatial energy plan. We also have the DEFRA-led Marine Spatial Prioritisation Programme, which started in 2021 and is ongoing, and Jen will talk about that right at the end. And that programme is cross-departmental, so that's thinking about marine spatial prioritisation at an England level. Even if you were only interested in offshore wind, and this is some old data, so there's no concern there about it, whether it's right or wrong, but let's just take it as an example. Even if you were just interested in the future of offshore wind and tidal, you have to think about the other sectors that have got ambitions too. And any of you that have been over to the MMO stand and have seen the Marine Spatial Planning game, plug, we will come and deliver that for your organisation if you want, will know that that's a balancing act, and making those decisions requires tough conversations with everyone at every level of the marine planning process. So our current approach to marine planning is somewhere on this continuum. And you have prioritised zoning on the right, and you have more facilitated on the left, and we're somewhere in the middle. And I don't know exactly where we are going, but we're going more towards the right. And I'm excited. I'm excited because marine planning has always been developmental. We've always had to learn fast. We've always had to do things without all of the information. And we do actually require all of you here and everyone else to help us do that, because it is a collaborative process. And we have just started in the East. So you can read about the East Marine Plan areas there if you would like. The East, I'm plugging Bob's work with EastMe as well. The East the East Marine Plan area runs from Flamborough Head down to Felixstowe. It covers a massive area, borders the Netherlands, Belgium, France. So there's transboundary work to do there in the North Sea. And as you've seen from some presentations the last 2 days, is busy. There's a lot going on. We have just started, see the wheel again. We have just started the Statement of Public Participation, and that is our commitment to our stakeholders, which in MACA, the Marine and Coastal Access Act, is everyone from the Secretary of States down to Joe and Jane Bloggs on the street. So you can all get involved if you want to. You don't even have to be in the East Marine Plan area. And if you want to, you can respond to our consultation. It's live until the 12th of February. If you're interested more generally in marine planning, there is our email address up there, the planning mailbox. Get in touch with us. We'll be happy to talk to you about what we do, share our lessons. And I hope I'm about on time there, because that is the end of my talk. Thank you, everyone.
So I think it's fair to say that was a masterclass in precision timing. Thank you so much, Rachel. Without further ado, we're going to move to a more regional scale now. So I'm going to hand over to Daniel Morris, who's going to talk to us about an Orkney Islands perspective on regional planning. Thank you very much, Daniel.
So, thank you very much. As just heard, I'm Daniel Morris, and I'm a marine planner for Orkney Islands Council. So, I'm going to talk to you today, I'll just move on to my slide, about how regional marine planning works in Scotland, what's great about it and what sets it aside from some of the other regional marine plans out there, and also what's not quite working and what can be improved. Just to mention as well, I'll be doing the talk, but it'll be my colleague James Green, who's sat over there. Just give us a wave, James. He'll be on the panel. And that's just because James has a huge amount of experience developing marine plans, so we thought we'd do a bit of a tag team for this. That does mean that I'm using this microphone here, so if I accidentally walk away and go quiet into the distance, just give me a shout or a wave or something. So you can't start a presentation about the Orkney Islands without reminding everybody where we actually are. So we are an archipelago of around 68 islands, about an hour's ferry drive north of Scotland. We have a population of around 23,000. Yeah, and I've noticed in some of the maps so far that Orkney's actually been cut off the top of the regions. So, yeah, don't forget about us. You can cut Shetland off, that's fine, but just make sure you don't cut us off, please. Nah, I'm kidding, I love Shetland. So, Orkney is a very special place when it comes to the natural world. It really is quite an outstanding marine environment, with one of the most intact seascapes in the UK, particularly the seagrass beds and the merle beds. They're in really brilliant condition, and I'm a diver. I go down and see these and the range of life that's down there. It really is special. And when it comes to the marine economy, we've also got a huge amount going on. So if you can think of it, there's a good chance it's operating somewhere in Orkney. Of particular note is the European Marine Energy Centre. That's the big yellow device at the top there. That's where they're testing the Orbital 2, the most powerful tidal device in the world. I thought one was impressive, but we just found out that they're probably going to be applying to put 70 more in place. So big developments on the way. We also have 15% of Scotland's farmed salmon comes from Orkney. We have 10% of the UK's oil and gas flows through Orkney as well. And believe it or not, we are the busiest cruise liner destination in the UK as well. So we have very busy ports and harbours. So all this means that regional marine planning is very important then to sustainably manage everything that's going on alongside the natural world. So just to give you a very brief background into how this works, Scotland is divided into 11 different marine regions. We heard some of that from the Marine Directorate yesterday, of which Orkney is one. There we are. So it was the Marine Scotland Act in 2010 that allowed the Scottish Government to develop its own national marine plan and also develop regional marine plans. So the National Marine Plan is developed by the government. You heard yesterday that National Marine Plan 2 is underway. And the regional marine plans, they're delegated to organisations within these marine regions. So the regional marine plans, they are still a statutory document and decisions must be made in accordance with them. And it's also still a government plan, but it's just been delegated to, in our case, us at Orkney Islands Council to develop this regional marine plan. Shetland and the Clyde are also currently underway with their regional marine plans. So in theory then, this approach, it's absolutely brilliant. It's about as close to genuine locally led policy development and community engagement as you can get. It can be tailored to specific issues and needs. And it's in Orkney, that means we can focus on the policies that are relevant to us, so like marine renewable energy, for example. We can make sure we go into more detail on those policies. And it's been written by the organisations that will be using the plans as well. It also means we can engage at a scale that's relevant to the community. So for us, in quite a unique situation with 68 different islands, it means we can get out and visit those islands to discuss the marine plan. So I mentioned that the council as well, we are the sole delegate for developing the plan, but we do work with an advisory group of 16 different members. So these are organisations from a range of different backgrounds, from commercial to business, commercial and business, to recreational interests like the dive club, statutory bodies, and we work very closely with these organisations. They play a key role in the development of the plan, so we consult with them very regularly, sometimes in subgroups on each individual policy, and we co-create the policies together with them. So they play a big role in the development of the plan. Another great thing about the Scottish approach is that it means we can take a regional approach to spatial planning as well. So just an example to give you quickly, we developed the finfish farming spatial guidance alongside the regional marine plan that we're developing at the moment. For this, we identified with a whole range of different local stakeholders, including the fish farm organisations themselves. So in Orkney, this is just salmon farms, really. And we identified 32 different constraints to fish farm developments. So after we'd identified these sensitive areas, we gave them a score to how sensitive they were, and we could produce a series of heat maps in ArcMap. So you can see an example of one there, and you can see that there's much more constraints. It's more constrained closer to shore, basically, and the further you move away from the land, the less constrained it is. And the industry, they know this, that is the way the industry is moving, but it just helps to guide developers to the appropriate areas. So in this way, just that point at the bottom there, spatial prioritisation in the traditional sense, it's not always the best approach to take at a local, regional scale, but rather a softer guidance approach works for us. And that way it means we don't stifle sort of industry innovation in their own technology. They can choose where they want to go and they can mitigate some of these constraints, but it just gives them that bit of flexibility in the policy. So all this is great in theory then, but it was in 2008 that Scottish ministers anticipated it would take 2 years to produce a national marine plan and a further 2 years to produce each regional marine plan. The first national marine plan took 5 years, so quite a bit longer than expected, and there are still no approved regional marine plans beyond the draft. So clearly something's not quite going as planned. So what is the hold-up then? So first of all, the enormity of the task, it was simply just underestimated by the Scottish Government when this idea in the Marine Scotland Bill was first passed. It hadn't been done before, particularly around the delegation of the appropriate governance. They were very much finding the way, and so right from day one, it just took longer than anticipated. So this second point is one of the biggest points actually that has slowed the process down quite a bit. So there is delegation to the local level, but it's only to a limited extent. So there's still multiple retained central government checkpoints in the plan preparation process. So I mentioned before that it's still a Scottish Government plan, and the Scottish Government and the Marine Directorate and ministers, they need to sign off at various points along the way. So just an example, we wrote out a draft regional marine plan, and we submitted that to get approval to go to consultation. And it's looking like it'll take about 18 months from the day we submitted our draft plan to actually be able to get the go-ahead to say, yes, you can consult on that. So that's held up the process a fair bit. Many of the early ambitions have not materialised as well, so this is an internal problem, I think, for a lot of projects, but funding is far less than the initial estimated costs, fairly self-explanatory. And there's also a certain level of caution from central government in allowing local policies to be developed. So you heard that the National Marine Plan 2 is being developed, but that means that we are a little bit further ahead in our regional marine plan, and we're taking forward policies on things like climate change and the biodiversity crisis. But a lot of these haven't been fully clarified at the national level in the National Marine Plan yet. So we're working within a very cautious environment, really, from central government in how much rein they give us to write our own policies on things like that. So what needs to be done then? I don't just want to come to you with problems, I want to give you some potential solutions as well. So just to save time, I'll pop these on the screen. But regions need more autonomy to set local objectives and associated policies. Providing that the regions can demonstrate that they're developing these regional marine plans in conformity with the National Marine Plan, we should be able to take like a draft to consultation. And there is a lot of very good experience writing these regional marine plans, so yeah, they need to be trusted to crack on with it, basically. This second point as well, so conformity with the National Marine Plan, it shouldn't overly restrict local policies either. And this boils down to how you interpret the word conformity, really. But if it's too strictly interpreted, then there really isn't much point in writing a regional marine plan if we can't put our own local spin on our own policies. And likewise, as a council, we don't want to go out and consult with the community if the feedback we get can't actually influence the policies that we're writing and that they're feeding back to us on. And yeah, point 3 as well, so good practice at the local level. It should be able to influence the national level as well, rather than just vice versa. So the final slide then, and just to wrap up, so many of those early ambitions that I spoke about in the first few slides, they are still achievable and they are still brilliant. It really is a great way of doing regional marine planning. But the process, it needs further support from central government and greater delegation, greater trust to the marine planning partnerships to make sure that we can fully represent the thoughts of the coastal communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. A very different scale and some interesting questions of power that have come up earlier today and we may return to later. Next up, I'd like to introduce Chloe Wenman from the Marine Conservation Society. So we're back in Wales now, and like I say, joyous bounce around various administrations, devolved and otherwise, to talk about priorities for strengthening the marine planning in Wales. Thanks, Chloe.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for sticking with us. I know this is a horrible, horrible slot and you're all falling asleep, but let's keep going. As Natasha said, I think this is a really great session because it really brings together a lot of what we've been talking about, so let's keep going. So my name's Chloe Wenman. I work for the Marine Conservation Society in Wales, and we've had England and Scotland, and I'm going to be bringing the Welsh perspective. So here's a gorgeous photo of the sea around Wales, Pembrokeshire to be exact. But as well as being absolutely beautiful, what I really wanted to demonstrate is something we all kind of know, but is not true, that it really seems totally vast and limitless. And yet we know it's not. This image is from the Wales National Marine Portal, and shows the real sheer amount of activity happening in Welsh seas, and indeed, all sea, really. So it shows fishing, aggregate dredging, ports, cabling, marine protected areas, all in one really busy space. And it really demonstrates the need for spatial planning. So in Wales, we have the Welsh National Marine Plan. It was published in 2019, and it really provides a framework for managing the activity in Welsh seas in a really joined up way. Whereas before, activities were kind of taken into account on a case-by-case basis, now the bigger picture has to be considered. And it was a really big achievement. It was a lot of collaborative effort to get to this stage, and we're really proud of it in Wales. However, times have moved on. We've had COVID, the war in Ukraine, and there's been a really big focus, as we know, as has been discussed a lot, on energy security. And this, of course, has led to an increase in investment in offshore renewables. I've got a few pictures here, but it's not meant to look like a kind of apocalyptic thing, but we know there's a lot. And we need offshore renewables, and as has been discussed already, we need them, but there's no point responding to the climate challenge if we damage nature further. There was a great phrase earlier, low carbon, high nature, which I think was great. So we need to find a way to do this alongside nature, and there are various ways in which we can do this. We've got, biodiversity net gain, net benefit, adding enhancement into existing developments, strategic compensation, co-location. But really the best way is to place the right technology in the right place from the start. And this calls for more prescriptive spatial planning. So these are three really high-level elements which we believe can be strengthened in Wales's marine planning framework, and indeed marine planning frameworks generally. So they're quite straightforward, and I think we all agree with them, but it's worth just kind of pointing them out anyway. So more spatial. This is around more clarity over what activity is best suited to happen where, and we can do this through constraints mapping, looking at opportunities for co-location. More holistic. So this is about cumulative impacts and implications for displacement. The third one, more strategic. So this is about the potential to introduce a hierarchy of decision-making, which can allow governments to really weigh up and prioritise different policy drivers and different activities for the sea. And obviously, this all has to be underpinned by better evidence. And really, more prescriptive spatial planning can benefit everybody. So directing activity away from the most environmentally sensitive areas can allow the space we need to protect, recover, restore, and enhance, both inside and outside MPAs. By front-loading decision-making, we can kind of save pressure on the application stage, time and resources at that stage, and potentially streamline consenting. And by assessing the quantum of development, i.e. the carrying capacity of the sea, we can provide certainty to industry, encouraging investment and boosting the blue economy. And all of this kind of trickles down to people as well. If we end up with more resilient ecosystems and a more sustainable economy, people will benefit too. And there's an argument that adding more prescription can really bring these issues to life and help to engage people in the process. So where are we in Wales? It was great that in March 2023, last year, the Minister announced a plan to add more prescription to the spatial planning process in Wales. She talked about cumulative impacts and development capacity, which is really great, and Welsh Government are now working to build more prescription into the current marine planning framework. And we're working with them to do this and support their work. You heard that right, we are an NGO, and we are working with the government to help make this happen, which is really exciting, actually, when that works well. Natural Resources Wales are also supporting this work, and this is a project which they're just starting, looking at the strategic mapping of opportunities to increase the resilience of marine and coastal ecosystems. So that's kind of all building the evidence base that can feed into this more prescriptive approach. And as I said, this is happening in a collaborative way, which is working. It's happening under the auspices mostly of the Marine Planning Stakeholder Reference Group, which is facilitated by Welsh Government and has all of these organisations on the screen, all contributing to policy making. And I think that's quite important. So that's all a lot of kind of nice, happy stuff. But I just want to go back to these three elements, and I want to focus in on this third one, more strategic, because this is the really hard one, isn't it? This is about making tough decisions, prioritising, making some people potentially unhappy. And I think we need to just think about that a little bit. So when we were asked to do these thoughts, we were asked to consider the notion of equity. And I think that can help here. So Ocean equity is quite a new kind of topic in academia, but really it's about equitable access to benefits and resources and protecting the most vulnerable from harm. And for this, I think we need healthy, resilient ecosystems, sustainable development, and open and transparent processes through which people can contribute. And so I think looking at marine planning through the lens of ocean equity can help us make the right decisions about the economy and nature. And this is just a diagram which kind of encapsulates the nature of those three elements. And so how can we add more equity into marine planning? As I just said, keeping those kind of three pillars of people, nature, and economy in mind, as well as the interplays between them, is absolutely crucial, I think. I know that Scotland, talk about National Marine Plan 2, talked about this, which was great to hear. Scenario planning can help think about the strategic element, and I know the Crown Estate's whole of the seabed approach talked about this too. This is really important in looking at different targets, economic, environmental, which means different government departments will have to talk to each other and communicate those different targets, and looking at the different scenarios which we could take and which ones involve different things being traded off. Climate change, obviously that's incredibly important if we want to embed equity, thinking about those most vulnerable and at risk. On the process side, this is really tricky, but there are various things we can do here. Ocean literacy, it's talked about a huge amount, but it's absolutely crucial. I'm going to do a little plug for one of the projects that we're running up in northeast Wales. It's called Hiraeth y Môr. It means longing for the sea. And it's all about boosting ocean literacy and kind of testing to see how that can help with managing the MPA up there, Liverpool Bay SPA. So projects like that, which can kind of help people connect and then find their voice and use it. So some other work, for example, that we're doing in England, it's been mentioned in another talk. It's called Community Voice Method, and it's about essentially that, helping people find their voice and use it in kind of quite difficult marine management conversations. Just transition, another phrase bandied around a lot, but of course it has to be embedded, especially when the use of our sea has to change from the status quo. And at the bottom of the slide, I've put a whole load of projects, some of which I've just talked about, and others which are all working on all of these different elements. And so to conclude, we're going to be looking to the sea more and more the sea is going to be coming to us. So marine planning must become more prescriptive. It must become more spatial, strategic, and holistic. And I think looking through the lens of equity can help us think about, frame that question of prioritisation. And we need to remember, as I said, that people really are central. I know we've said it all the time in this conference, but it's really true, and you can't overstate it. By connecting people back to nature, and then by channeling the values that come from that into decision-making, means that we will be able to end up with management frameworks which are equitable, sustainable, and resilient to both political and environmental change. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chloe. Some excellent points, well landed there, and we'll come back to some of those later. Next up, we have my colleague at Newcastle University, Sarah Coulthard. So I guess harking back to some of Chloe's points about voice, Sarah's really going to talk about trust and legitimacy, so how she's been working with fishers, looking at a two-way street, how we create a two-way street in pursuit of co-management. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, just before I start, I have to share with you the moment of horror that has just unfurled whilst I was sitting in the docks. So I had my notes all ready to hold them high in solidarity with my fellow colleagues who are struggling with menopausal symptoms and anybody else who finds it difficult to articulate quite a complex idea within a 10-minute slot. But on opening my notes, I realised they were not my notes. This is a letter from my 6-year-old primary school about how to use number bots. Bloody useless. So we're going to wing it with a reduced set of notes, which are partially, it's completely incomplete, but hopefully we'll be all right. Right. So if I can remember what this talk is about, it's about the role of trust in enabling collaborative forms of decision-making. And it's being an important prerequisite to being able to deliver co-management. And it's loosely framed around 3 points. And the first of these is the relevance of trust, the trickiness of trust, and the importance of not forgetting what your third point is during a talk. I can't bloody remember. Begins with our recognizing and protecting trust where it already exists. So, oh, hang on, that's the wrong way. Thank you. I'm off, out the door. Okay, so the relevance of trust. So the panel question, which I'm really looking forward to debating shortly, is about how do we mobilise engagement and choose between priorities. And I don't know who put this together, but it's very well worded. It wasn't me. But it speaks very conveniently directly to the relevance of trust. So we need trust to mobilise engagement. People need to see a point to turn up and give their time, and trust that their contributions will serve some meaningful purpose, otherwise they just won't come. And we know very well that a good engagement experience strengthens trust, and a bad engagement experience quickly breaks it. But it's this choosing between priorities, all which have valid arguments. This is when trust is at its most fragile. Tensions between different priorities with different values and hierarchies are reflected too in tensions between different knowledges and understandings, especially regarding the need for intervention in the first place, for example, and the impact on people living with some of the realities of the policies that are being implemented. So trust is a two-way street where requests for trust from stakeholders to engage is matched by a demonstrable consideration of those contributions in transparent decision-making processes. So, the trickiness of trust. I'll admit I'm a bit sceptical about the use of trust as a concept in engagement debates. It means different things to different people. It takes a long time to build, and it can be lost in an instant. So, is seeking trust an overly ambitious ask? Think about the number of people in your own lives whom you would say you actually trust, and I bet you can probably count them on a single hand. However, we ask for trust from complete strangers we'll never meet, and have even started to evaluate the success of some of our operations based on whether trust has been achieved or not. So trust is tricky and needs to be treated with some care. But saying that, the evidence and theory all attest the importance of trust. It's trust in fair process and confidence in decisions made are important foundations for civic engagement across any policy area. Trust and meaningful engagement are a part of procedural justice, the idea that in a fair society, people should have the right to have some say in things that affect their lives. And where they do have that right, more legitimate outcomes are more likely. Trust can lead to greater compliance, strengthen social cohesion, and can even induce positive behaviour changes. But we know that trust is lacking especially between many working in commercial fishing and multiple government organisations who are managing them fisheries and the environment. But that's also that mistrust that we see documented most recently is also reflective of a wider public mistrust in science and politics in general. So the third point, remembering and recognising trust and protecting it where it exists. In considering all of these challenging questions, can we find some exemplars from which we can learn? So I was very fortunate this summer because I had a brilliant time running a project which involved visiting each of the 10 IFCA districts. It was like the Grand IFCA tour, and I had far more fun than I probably should have done. But I spent my time interviewing, so IFCAs are the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authorities, which we've heard some presentations mentioned today. And I spent my time interviewing the IFCA staff and committee members about how things are going, what's going well, what's not going so well, but also about whether they felt that IFCAs are a good vehicle to deliver co-management. And of the 75 interviewees I spoke with, all of them said yes in response to that question without hesitation. And as the project progressed, it seemed like a ridiculous question to still be asking them. So, IFCAs, if you don't know, are devolved regional management bodies responsible for delivering a sustainable inshore fishery and marine environment. in a way that balances social, environmental and economic benefits. And it's this explicit remit of balance that is spoken about by IFCAs with considerable passion and commitment that makes them a really interesting vehicle, already delivering effective management around our coasts. When it comes to choosing between priorities, IFCAs are focused on striking the right balance. The IFCA decision-making process, which we've spoken about a lot today and yesterday, by which this balance is achieved, makes them even more interesting. So each IFCA is governed by an authority. That is a joint committee made up of local authority members from that IFCA's district, members from key statutory bodies, MMO appointees from the local community, including commercial, recreational fishers, and even academics, although I'm not on an IFCA yet, but I'm not going to hold that against them at this point. I'm just saying. Collectively, the authorities represent the diverse interests of coastal stakeholders in that region, treating the sea as a resource for all society, not just one stakeholder group. So the IFCA process. During IFCA meetings, IFCA staff prepare and present evidence-based management options, drawing from their own regional granular data sets. That was a point that was made yesterday as well, the need for more granular data. IFCAs are producing that and using it to make evidence-based options. Usually, following extensive stakeholder engagement processes. Management proposals are then democratically debated and voted on by IFCA members. This is a meeting where they're doing exactly that at the Northumberland IFCA. IFCAs then implement through bylaws and enforce management measures with stewardship over the entire process, from the identified need through to the implementation and then monitoring and regular review. So they have ownership over that process. So that really avoids any of this get it off my desk quick, it's someone else's problem syndrome that we see sometimes in policy making. If they cut corners at the beginning of the process, it comes back to bite them. So they make sure they don't cut corners in that process of bylaw development. So it's an effective model delivering co-management and deliberative democracy with success. And I think it's important to say that in an era of social media where fake news is rife and public confidence in science is at an all-time low, perhaps, these forums for public debate, such as those that IFCAs demonstrate, where views can be challenged and evidence can be openly, critically assessed, these platforms have never been more important than they are today. And theory tells us that this type of face-to-face democratic deliberation, this use of critical thinking and reasoned argument is a really important way for enhancing civic engagement and legitimacy. Okay, so I've got 2 minutes to go through some stories. So that's basically, the more time I spend with an IFCA, the more my skepticism interest begins to wane. And to finish with a couple of very short stories to illustrate why. The first is the DEFRA consultation on highly protected marine areas that happened in one of the 5 candidate sites 18 months ago. This was in reference to the Lindisfarne Holy Island candidate site. So when that was announced as a possible candidate site for HPMA, there was widespread disillusion, disengagement, anger and fear amongst fishing communities in that area. People felt there was no point in engaging, it was a done deal. But DEFRA had an extensive consultation planned. They had multiple in-person workshops, which were hard to do, but they listened carefully, and it made a massive difference to those people living in the island. The Northumberland IFCA support to DEFRA in facilitating that consultation was absolutely crucial. They held multiple meetings to persuade fishers that it was a meaningful engagement, a meaningful consultation. They spent weeks visiting harbours with laptops, helping stakeholders to complete the online forms, as well as submitting their own detailed evidence as to their position on the HPMA site. And as a result, DEFRA were well equipped with sufficient evidence to make the decision, in this case, not to implement a HPMA on Holy Island. And the demonstration of that meaningful consultation has really helped to furnish trust throughout the entire region. Protecting the existing good relationships between commercial fishermen and the NIFCA in that region, which had been built up over many years. And these are some of the pictures of recent fisher forums which are being held where fishermen can drop in for informal chats to keep the IFCA staff updated about what's happening in their lives and in the fishery. The next very quick story is the Cromer Chalk Reef MCZ in Norfolk. Now, the chalk reef is an internationally important feature of MCZs, and new evidence was presented by Natural England to the Eastern IFCA, suggesting a possible impact of crab potting in the area through the abrasion of ropes and pots. Now, potting is usually a low impact gear, but when put together with a fragile site, there are questions about the extent of that low impact status. Now, the IFCA could have adopted the precautionary approach and closed the fishery of regional, cultural and economic importance, but they didn't do that because IFCAs are about balancing conservation with... Sorry, IFCAs, I can see you hovering. I'll be very quick. IFCAs are about balancing conservation with sustainable fisheries. So in response, they're working very closely with Natural England and others to gather the right evidence to ascertain the actual impact of potting relative to things like storm damage and natural erosion. So when I interviewed the commercial fishermen in that IFCA, they spoke with considerable trust in their IFCA to come to an evidence-based decision. So in conclusion, it's tricky, but there requires caution around expecting it and especially around evaluating with it. Building trust is hard work, but the good news is that it does exist and is being furnished, but isn't always recognised, celebrated or nurtured. So in response to the question of how do we improve engagement, invest in what you already have, there's some really good work going on out there, especially in regional fisheries management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Yeah, bring the notes. Trust your speakers to finish on time. It's all good. Thank you, Sarah. Really, really interesting and some very much more visceral human elements, I think, than some of the quite dispassionate planning strategic elements we've seen, and we'll get into the weeds of that in a moment. Speaker number 5 on the list, we've got Simone de Winter. Thank you very much, Simone, from Cefas. So she's going to speak about cumulative effects of offshore wind farms in the marine spatial world. Thank you very much, Simone.
So, hello everyone. As I mentioned before, my name is Simone de Winter and I work as a Senior Marine Scientific Advisor at Cefas. And today I will be talking about the cumulative effects of offshore wind farms in a marine spatial world. So the topic I will be covering today was done in collaboration with different organizations. You can see their logos displayed here on this slide. But of course, as well, with the fellow help of my colleagues within Cefas, Adrian Judd, Daniel Wood, and Charlie Hobbs. So let's set the scale of the topic. As the number of offshore wind farms and soon other forms of renewable energy are increasing, so is there an increasing need to manage our marine space. If you look at this image, it shows different activities associated with offshore renewable energies, like development areas, cable routes, but also ports and shipping lanes related to the construction and operational maintenance of these development sites. So all of this is all in the same marine space with other marine users present and marine activities. Plus, on top of that, we have the commitment to tackle climate change and protect also marine biodiversity. Therefore, a key area of consideration is the cumulative effects created by these multiple activities, including offshore wind farms within regions. So, cumulative effects assessment, what do we mean? We see it as a systematic procedure for identifying and evaluating the significance of effects from multiple sources and activities, and for providing an estimate on the overall expected impact to inform management measures. The analysis of the causes, pathways, and consequences of these effects on receptors is an essential and integral part of the process. So it can be done on different purposes and on different scales. You can be looking for one single pressure towards a single subject, a single pressure towards multiple subjects, but also from multiple pressures towards multiple subjects. We will highlight a systematic approach to cumulative effect assessments, what they can do in a marine spatial context, drawing on methods and outputs and an understanding from a range of cumulative impact signs like ACRCROSS, Coulthard 2023, but also ODEM, but also explore what they cannot do yet. So cumulative effects assessments identify the pathways from drivers, activities, pressures, state, and the impacts and the consequences of these effects on the receptors. These pathways can also be called depth sea worm, which was developed based on a previous depth sea framework and applied in the Coulthard 2023 framework. So drivers are the basic needs that drive human activities. You have like the society need for food, energy, but also the need for materials. As a direct consequence of this, you have then human activities like fishing, renewable energy, and extraction of materials. These human activities exert pressures on the marine environment, like, for example, the disturbance of species. This then alters the state of an ecosystem component, which creates an impact on ecosystem services. Here you can see a few examples of the depth worm pathways that were developed for the different receptors under the OSPAR Coulthard thematic assessments. They are called Sankey diagrams. So please do not try to understand it completely. We won't test you at the end. But if you look at the one that's big on the slide, you can see which activities exert which marine pressures and therefore alter the state of an ecosystem component and which ecosystem services then might be impacted. Actually, the different width of the bars identifies how big the impact could potentially be. However, we do not know with certainty which one is number one. We can say which one is in the top, which one are in the top 5, but we can't say which one actually will have the biggest impact. So here we moved on from OSPAR work for a method that would actually be usable in the UK. So if you look at this picture, this is actually work from an academic study that involved a lot of modeling. But do you really understand what is going on here? I thought that would be the answer to it. Thank you for answering that. So we wanted to make sure that we developed a method that was easy to understand, user-friendly, and transparent, even though people might not agree with the output of this. We have done this by adding a spatial component to it. Further, we find it necessary that it needed to cover all receptors, like benthic and fisheries, as often cumulative effects assessment only focus on marine mammals and birds. Further, it needs to take into consideration food, ecosystem services, but also supporting habitats. We wanted to make sure we avoided complex modeling, but be able to use outputs of models, like distribution layers of fish and birds. Ultimately, all we are trying to do is what is there and is it impacted? So here we actually built on from agriculture's work. However, we included avoidance under exposure, a spatial component that I will talk about a little bit later, but also start to think about the confidence of the data and the knowledge that goes into the exposure and the severity. However, that won't be covered in this presentation. So for each activity pressure receptor linkage, we consider and score several factors, and each component is scored between 0 and 1. So we have avoidance, which is the receptor's ability to avoid a certain pressure. We have dispersal, which is the dispersal of the pressure of the area of the spatial extent. We have frequency, which is the temporal overlap of each activity pressure combination with an ecosystem component. We have the spatial extent, which is the spatial overlap between the activity pressure combination and a receptor. We have persistence, which is the length of time that the pressure stays in the marine environment after an activity has stopped. Then we also have severity, which is the likely sensitivity of a receptor towards the pressure where an interaction happens. If you score all these several factors and exposure and the severity together, standardize them, you can actually calculate an impact risk score. So how do we then define the spatial extent? We divide the regional area into a grid. Just to say, the colors in this example are just to showcase, they do not indicate any values. So in the first grid, you can see the spatial extent of the activities and the pressures. Then in the second grid, you have the spatial extent of a receptor. And then in the third grid, you can actually see where both the spatial extent of the activity pressure and the receptor overlap. We can calculate an impact risk score in every separate grid. So let's just walk through the method. So stage 1 is let's define the linkages between the activities, the pressures, and the receptors. In stage 2 and 3, we score the linkages and determine the spatial extent. Then in stage 4, you can see that each linkages has its own spatial layer, divided into a grid square. So there's lots of detail, but you can still see what's going on. Here then, each grid square, we would calculate the impact risk. Note just because of the number of calculations, this will be done in a programming software like R or Python. Then in stage 5, we combine all these separate impact risk maps together by adding them up to create a cumulative impact risk map. And this can then be searched for specific receptors, areas, type of wind turbines, but also on impacts like natural capital or good environmental status. So what are the current limitations and should be included in the further development of these methods? So currently, for the receptors, we're only looking at absence and presence data. But we want to include density data into the future of this method development. Further, also for future wind farms, we do not know the exact locations of the turbines, only the licensed areas, which means approximations are based on the pressure. So we can say where an impact is likely to occur, but we cannot completely say how much of a population would be impacted. Also, it is important to consider that all these activities that are going on in our environment will have impact on multiple receptors, which can mean that this can alter our state of ecosystem services and good environmental status. And as humans, we are directly dependent on those. One of the other main issues is the interactivity of pressures. For example, if a bird is already dead because of one pressure, do the other pressures actually really matter? So those are the things that we're working on at the moment and that we want to take further into the future, but also would like you guys' input about as well. So thank you so much for listening. If there are any more questions, I would be happy to answer them in the panel debate, but also don't hesitate to reach out to us or my fellow colleagues within Cefas after the conference as well, if you're interested in the topic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Simone. So just to close our presentations before we go to the panel section of this session, we've got Jennifer Goodman joining us from the Seabed User and Developers Group. She's going to talk to us about some principles for prioritisation between creating space for nature and the blue economy. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I was going to make comments about how cold it is in here and whether that's a deliberate ploy to keep you all awake or otherwise. I think everyone's talked about the fact this is the last slot of the last day. I definitely get the last. Anyway, okay, crack on. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Godwin, and I'm the Executive Officer for the Seabed User and Developer Group, and I'm here today to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing as industry on marine spatial prioritisation. So we've been looking at defining principles for prioritisation in pursuit of space for nature and the blue economy. I'm just restarting my timer on here so I can keep track. And I feel like the speakers that have gone before me have really set me up nicely for some of the things that I'm going to say. So it's really great to hear that we're quite joined up. But first, I want to quickly tell you about who the SUDG is. We are an informal grouping of the UK's key marine industries who share a common interest and commitment to sustainable development within the marine environment. Our members represent the cable sector, the UK energy sector, including renewables, oil and gas, ports, aggregate extraction, leisure boating and marinas, and carbon capture, storage and utilisation. And the Crown Estate is also... Oh, wrong slide. Sorry, guys. The Crown Estate is also one of our members, and they sponsor the SUDG Secretariat. In essence, we work with government, its agencies, conservation bodies, and other stakeholders to support the development of cost-effective regulation and marine management that benefits both industry and the environment. Let's see if I can get my clicking in the right order now. Okay, there we are. So marine industries have a vested interest in having a well-managed and thriving marine environment. Marine recovery and increased marine resilience is in everyone's best interest, especially when it comes to navigating our environmental consenting regime. We have high quality and robust environmental legislation in the UK, and marine industries are really good at complying with these regulations, working through the mitigation hierarchy and delivering sustainable, appropriately assessed development projects. However, we've been hearing a lot about this today and yesterday. Despite this, we're still seeing a decline in the marine environment. And on top of that, we're all aware of the increasing demands on our seas and the increasing pressures that these demands will bring. And we recognise that something has got to change in the way that we manage our seas. So UK government is currently considering this in England through the Marine Spatial Prioritisation Programme. And so as industry, we began to think about what we could do to support that process and what we could offer as evidence to inform that work, and equally to inform the similar conversations and deliberations that are happening in the devolved nations. So we decided to play to our strengths, and what we do well as the SUDG is work collaboratively across industry and closely with environmental NGOs, SNCBs and arm's length bodies. And we decided to bring together all of the key marine stakeholders to start discussing marine spatial prioritisation and to begin thinking about principles for how prioritisation decisions might be made. Now, ultimately, any final principles for prioritisation will be defined by government, thankfully. However, as a group of informed and interested stakeholders, we hope that the considerations that we've come up with will contribute to that evidence base for government. So what do we actually do? We held a total of 3 workshops in 2023, and broadly the attendees included all of the different SUDG industry members. We had the Wildlife Trust, we had the RSPB, we had representation from the fishing sector, including the NFFO, we had the Chamber of Shipping, Energeo Alliance, the Crown Estate, and we also had some government departments, including Natural England, JNCC, the MMO, and the North Sea Transition Authority. And the concrete outputs from these workshops is a set of recommendations with consideration for marine spatial prioritisation decision-making in the UK, which I'll move on to in the next slides. The less tangible output from these workshops is a reminder to everybody working in this space that there is more that unites us than divides us. We had an incredibly diverse range of stakeholders sitting around the table. They were all very balanced and pragmatic in the way that they engaged with each other. And we quite quickly identified a number of common areas of agreement and shared objectives for all users and activities and interests in the marine space. And don't get me wrong, when it gets down to the detail, when we look at the project level, there's still going to be disagreements. But I think if we are starting with that same high level of expectation, hopefully, when you get down to the project level, it will make those disagreements much easier to navigate. So I'll try and give you a flavour of some of the headline messages from that work, but also I want to announce that, this is an exclusive. We've just published this paper, so it's on the SUDG website, so you can see the full report there, and I'm sure you'll see it cropping up around the place, and I think we might go to ministers with it soon, so, an exclusive for Coastal Futures. So the first recommendation was that, guided by a UK-wide long-term plan for our marine space, prioritisation decisions should be set with an understanding of what they mean internationally, nationally, regionally, and locally, recognising that ecosystems don't respect political boundaries or the UK's devolved administrations. So in other words, as many speakers have said before me, let's manage our seas holistically, both in terms of human activities and the roles that they're fulfilling in society and the economy, but also in terms of the environment. Secondly, in any conversations around making prioritisation decisions, transparency is going to be critical. All stakeholders should be consulted on the evidence to be used, the issues to be considered, and the judgments to be applied, to bring them on the journey and to support a greater understanding of the way that decisions will be made. I think for the most part, the players in the marine space are pretty mature, for the most part. And there's an acceptance that difficult decisions will have to be made by government about how we manage our seas. But from an industry perspective, what we need is clarity about how those decisions will be made and certainty wherever it can be given. Okay, so this slide tries to capture a number of the different principles that were identified. I'll try and give you a quick run through of some of them. So prioritisation decisions should be flexible and reviewed over time with built-in feedback mechanisms and monitoring. They should consider terrestrial constraints and factors, both in terms of planning and space, and we heard that in the session this morning. They should consider the cumulative impacts of multiple activities and how this can be built into the prioritisation decision-making process. They should support moving away from making decisions on a project-by-project basis with a first-past-the-post principle. They should consider not only the most lucrative activities, but also the diversity of benefits, including social, cultural, and local and regional importance of activities. They should consider that future marine policies will also need their own spatial requirements, such as marine net gain or net benefit, and evolving plans for strategic compensation. And finally, as the approach to natural capital matures, there should be a greater consideration of this in policy making and decision making. With regards to safeguarding, prioritisation decisions should contribute towards the continued ability to achieve existing targets, such as those in the Environment Act, Net Zero, GES, and the strategic objectives of OSPA's North East Atlantic Environment Strategy. They should also recognise that environmental protections should continue to be upheld, ensuring that the same functions and levels of protection are maintained, and that decisions reflect the holistic objective of nature recovery. And in terms of risk awareness, prioritisation decisions should consider if we know enough about what resources are available, i.e. when a decision is made, do we understand the consequences both on the supply chain for industry and the resources and technical knowledge within government and decision-making bodies. We live in a world where we know that things must be done differently, and we must consider how to balance innovation and risk in decision-making. This is my final slide. So finally, one of the messages that came out loud and clear from the workshops was that we need a long-term plan or vision for the UK's marine space, taking into account the needs of users, communities, and the natural environment. And Rachel set me up perfectly with this by talking about the UK Marine Policy Statement, because the most logical way to have this long-term plan is to have an update to the UK's Marine Policy Statement, which was last published in 2011 and is now 12 years old. So this recommendation, as with all the others I've gone through, was signed up to by the attendees of the workshop, representing the majority of UK marine stakeholders. Last slide is just to say thank you very much and to point everyone to the final report, which is on the SUDG website, and also to say, for anyone who was paying attention to the images that I used, they were all generated by AI with varying degrees of kind of literal interpretation of my prompts. So yes, this one's marine space.
Superb. Love the AI thing. Amazing. Just would like to thank the speakers very much indeed for their presentations before we welcome them back down to the pit, will I call it, to answer our master questions. So hopefully I can do some filler as they make their way down here. A really interesting set of questions for me. I think we've talked about geographic scale, spatial scale, temporal scale. We've talked about an awful lot of things in these last 2 days. It's been amazing. And I just wonder if the participants can keep in their mind as we go forward the scale of equity we're asking for when we're talking here. Oh, close to the mic. Good God, nobody's ever suggested that before. I shall come close to the mic. Thank you very much indeed, speakers, for returning. Just please note we have a substitution at halfway, so Daniel Morris is now replaced by his colleague, James Green from Orkney Islands Council. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'm going to proceed from number 1 to number 6 around our speakers to answer the question before the court, which for this session is, how do we mobilise engagement in strategic marine resource management and choose between priorities? Over to you, Rachel.
No pressure.
No pressure.
It's a big question. It's a good question. I think a lot of it's been answered in the talks, so that's a nice dib out. But from my experience, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify who you need to engage with. So we spend a lot of time talking to each other, we work with each other, we know each other really, really well, but it comes back to that point yesterday, who's not in the room?
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about regional prioritisation and regional marine plans and all the processes, you really need to make time and space for people who have a stake in the marine environment, as I was saying, to engage. It comes to the trust points that were being made by Sarah. No one wants to come to a death by PowerPoint workshop, and you need to keep that momentum up throughout a process. Yeah. So you need to make sure that there's feedback. You've told me this is what we did with it. And you have to be really clear about what's within the scope of people's power to change, what's already decided, what can't we change. There's a really good example from, I think, the first East Marine planning process. And someone stood up and said, way back in 2012, we don't want any offshore wind in the East Marine plan areas. And we had to say, well, that's not within our gift. So honesty about what is possible. And then when it comes to the prioritisation decisions, I should try and be quick. I think Jen said it really well. There needs to be strategic prioritisation that's transparent. We have expertise across the breadth of everyone in this room and outside of this room, and we should make use of it. But when it comes to regional prioritisation, you need to involve the people on the ground, and you need to create a language that everyone can use. We're not all marine scientists. Yeah. So that common language is really important too. Yeah. And I think the natural capital approach is a really useful way to do that.
Good framing that. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. I think, clarity, honesty, respect and responsiveness, buzzwords sort of going forward. And I think that's fantastic to hear. Let's move on to James to give us the response from the regional perspective, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I've lived in Orkney. I moved to Orkney 35 years ago, been a long time, and I find that island communities hold a lot of knowledge, and I think that that's probably reflected in coastal communities across the whole country. And so, how can we? I take the question as how can we do engagement better? And I kind of reflect on the way that I've been involved in engagement over the years, and it's about going in and listening. And when I've done that and I've come out of a consultation event, I've felt so much better because I've been like, I've actually really that's really been useful. And the first thing I think is we need to do more of this, and we need to get out and speak to people more regularly. So that's always a key point. It's just being open, being able to listen, and valuing local knowledge is a really important thing. In terms of spatial prioritization, it's like, it makes my brain bleed thinking about everything that's going on. All these things. It's like there's a lot more smarter people than me thinking about the technical elements of that. But one of my observations is that there's not one agency who's controlling this. You've seen from the Scottish presentation yesterday that offshore wind spatial planning is being led by the Scottish government, and I think it's legitimate that they're offshore, they have national strategic importance, national critical infrastructure, things that are actually happening in the inshore area, salmon farming in our context, future potential for seaweed farming, shellfish farming, ports and harbour master planning. The legitimate place for those to be planned really lies at the local level. So it's that thing about where the power lies. It lies in multiple places, and it's, I think, doing it as close to the people who are affected by it as possible, but being realistic that you're not going to be able to decentralise to the extent where we're going to be having spatial plans done, holistic spatial plans done at the regional level. Realistic about that, but where we think we can add value, we will. I think we have the legitimate right to do that in terms of spatial prioritisation. Yeah,
glad somebody else said it made their brain bleed as well. These things are big and they're knotty problems, so it's really nice to hear that. And it's really nice to see the opportunity in local as well. And actually maybe it is the onus is on us in the room that can work from global to local to support those transitions so that we can really take that knowledge and integrate it across those scales as well. Chloe, next. What do Wales think? No pressure.
I'm not
All
Wales. I mean, the accent kind of gives it away anyway. Yeah, so I think it is a great question, isn't it? Because and the answer is kind of there because it's only by engaging people in strategic management that we can choose between those priorities. Because you incorporate the different views and values. Someone, I'm really sorry, I can't remember who, said last year this great analogy about just like ecosystems can only be resilient if we have genetic variety, management frameworks can only be robust if we have a range of views and values integrated into them. And that really struck with me because I think that's really it, isn't it? There isn't a one-size-fits-all to engagement. We've heard a whole load of methods and great case studies on engaging different groups of people. How you engage the fishing industry could be different to how you engage ports and people. Consultation is not enough. That's something, for sure, it's not enough. And I think it also comes back to this question, because, this session is really hard, isn't it? Because we're talking about strategic priorities and then equitable engagement in people. How do you link those things? But it really comes back to why should people care, I think it's going to become more and more obvious why we should care as, things like offshore renewables increase and ports are going to increase and we're going to have more and more infrastructure connecting sea and land. So I think it's going to become more apparent, but it's really hard, isn't it?
It's hard, tough, cross-scale. So something as dispassionate as the planning that we've been talking about, straight into Sarah's camp, which is actually the humanity and the trust and the things that we do all hold dear. So, Sarah, over to you.
The overrunning of time. Sorry, everyone. So the mobilising engagement stuff, I think the importance of relationships and those relationships that are embedded in the communities, so working with those organisations. The point has been made multiple times in the last 2 days. But that's really important because a lot of the engagement that we do is very extractive and people don't see the fruits of it, and then that is where the erosion of trust occurs. But I think as well the choosing between priorities is a really hard bit, but I think increasingly those decisions shouldn't always lie with the top level civil servants and ministers. They need to be publicly, democratically debated and learning from platforms that already deliver that model is a good thing. I just wanted to quote Yvette Curtis, who opened the conference. I wrote it down, but she said it was so good. She said, look at who's already delivering and connect with organisations leading change. Yeah. That's all I have to say on that. You know what I think.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Simone.
You're probably wondering why is someone with talking about cumulative effects in this session when we're talking about prioritization? Well, the main thing is, I think we need to look at it from a wider perspective. Cumulative effects is a very difficult topic. The marine environment is a very hard environment to understand. And it's also a very young topic in the science world. But as scientists, we kind of need to start asking stakeholders to look at the wider perspective and as the whole marine environment instead of isolating receptors. And we need to do this in a way that they can understand and by providing open source and transparent information. So they need to be able to, for example, go to the OSPAR website, look at those thematic assessments and the Sankey diagrams I showed in the presentation, and they can see how their industry sits in the whole marine environment and how all these different pressures interact with one another.
Thank you very much, Simone. Finally, last word for this go round to Jennifer.
Oh, well, I was changing my mind each time someone said something as to what I was going to say, and then what I've settled on is, I don't think I might disagree with you, because I think there's maturity definitely within industry, within the different stakeholders that are talking about the marine space. There's quite a lot of maturity there. We're used to working with each other. Actually, I think we need government to be quite direct and quite clear on what the priorities are, because when you know what you're dealing with, then you can react and you can plan as industry. And so, I think that would be one of the things that I would push for. We know that there will be, to an extent, winners and losers. We know that not everything can happen, but at least if we know what we're dealing with, and it comes back to some of my slides about transparency, giving people the information about how a decision is made, taking them on the journey. So it does tie in with everything, but I think at some point, somebody's going to have to make the difficult decision and say, this is what we're prioritising. And that has to be government.
Interesting. It's not getting any easier, folks. Right. We only have a couple of minutes because I tend to take a little bit of chair's prerogative and say something at the end. But we do have time for a couple of questions from the audience. We've definitely got a hand up on Slido, then we'll go to Diana. Go on, Diana first, then Slido.
Hi. So this was to Sarah, really, and so if I just knew your presentation, I'd be so inspired and I'd think, wonderful. I can say so little about in what context I know what I'm about to say because it's not published yet and a lot in confidence and so on. But a lot of the fishers don't see it that way. And so I can only say what is in the media at this point, and there is media to show that in certain locations the trust has utterly broken down, completely and utterly, between fishers and various regulatory bodies. And so maybe we need to talk afterwards, but I almost can't, I almost feel like if you were talking about another country or another time, but what you've discovered and what I know from this thing I can't talk about.
Just little chat. I don't see what you're both saying as contradictory at all, actually. I think both examples exist where we are. So I think what Diana's alluding to very much Sarah would recognise, and I would just cede the floor to Sarah to maybe respond to that.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. I really hoped somebody would, because I know exactly what you mean, and IFCAs get a lot of flack, to be honest, especially if you read fishing news. There are challenges, of course, that the model isn't perfect, but democracy isn't perfect either, but it's the best we've got. But in response to this issue, IFCAs aren't there to be popular. They're implementing difficult, effective management that balances conservation with keeping sustainable fisheries open. And that striking of a balance means that you're often striking a balance between marine conservation objectives and multiple different coastal priorities means that often no one is ever happy. And I've got a quote here from one IFCA officer who said, if no one's happy but no one's livid, you've probably got the management about right. So that is one thing to bear in mind. But I know the project you mean, and I also I was involved in that project as well. But I think it's really important to note that what happens within the IFCAs isn't always visible and communicated as much as it could be with the broader fishing society, with the broader fishing community. So I interviewed the commercial fishermen who are on the IFCAs, who see the debates and hear the evidence, and that's where this very positive story came from. But there are, it's quite complex. We can have a chat afterwards. But there are multiple reasons why. Also things like bad news often travels further than good news. You don't get phoned up if you're in the NFFO or whatever by fishermen who are happy with their engagement. But if you go to Northumberland, where they've had really quite advanced levels of fisheries management, like the pot limitation for crab and lobster fishing there in the inshore area, which is something that the FMP said was probably quite difficult to do, the fishermen there are absolutely 100%. We're so glad that that management's in place because it keeps out some of these more industrial scale fishing and protects our inshore zone. So I think it's really important to see the nuance behind what inshore fisheries management is about and think about some of those things. But yeah, let's have a chat afterwards. And there are lots of IFCA representatives here who can help me out with this discussion as well, because you all know this too.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Sarah. Brave attempt. Go to a quick Slido question.
This question is for Rachel. It's a very popular one too. And it says, will new marine plans include restoration and recovery strategies?
Yeah, we'll have to. I mean, we will, won't we? I mean, you can't have all of the work that's going on and not include that. And I'm so encouraged with some of the spatial mapping work that's coming through, because that's what we need. If you want to represent a sector, if we think about it as a sector, I know it's not, you need to have data, you need to have maps. And the thing that we've struggled with in previous marine plans is not quite having the granularity of the data or the maps that are available for us to be able to draw a line on the map and say, here be an area for restoration and recovery, don't go there. But if you look at the marine plans, there are policies that exist that say things, for example, in the south, Way back in 2015, one of the first jobs that I had was to look at bioremediation options for water quality improvements, which is a popular topic now, and I can confirm that there wasn't enough space in the south to roll that out. But we were able to write a policy that said, if there's a habitat that's important for that ecosystem service, please don't damage it, because we need it here in this plan area. And the current marine policy statement, and I don't disagree with you, Jen, but the current marine policy statement does make provisions for restoration and recovery. So we can do that without a change to the marine policy statement. We just need the data.
Thank you very much. One more question before I pontificate 1 second. Right, I've got a boom right in the middle, dead in my eye line. Can't see who it is because the lights really are bright. Apologies.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie Rist from Wildlife and Countryside Link. And I've got a question, I guess, for everyone on the panel. And we've talked a lot today about who's meant to be in the room, who isn't meant to be in the room in these conversations. And I think some group of people that are missing from my perspective are definitely the politicians. And prior to this role that I've had now, I worked at DEFRA. And I think it became more and more apparent the closer that we got to an election that actually politicians aren't going to stand up, and it might be quite political suicide to stand up and say, you know, we support offshore wind and not fishers, and, you know, we're here for Trident but not offshore wind. And so I suppose in absence of those brave decisions that have to be made, and probably won't be made in a year that a general election is happening, how do we, as everyone in this room, industry included, start making those decisions on their behalf? And I guess if you don't think the decision-making power lies at the top, but rather more democratically, how do the processes need to be put in place to make sure that prioritisation is happening in that way?
Superb. Right. 3-word answers for everybody. Go, Rachel.
Why are we not lobbying our MPs? That's your democratic power.
Excellent.
If you want your MPs to do something, let them know.
And what can we go and do when we leave the room, which is one thing that's been playing on my brain. So, yeah, boom. Go, Rachel. James.
Yeah, I mean, my interaction with politicians is through locally, so it's through our elected members. So, I mean, I think that we are as close to the community as we can get in terms of, like, there's 23,000 people, there's 21. There's basically 1,000 people per elected member in our community. So we're quite close to that relationship with our politicians. We know them, we speak to them. And it's, you know, one thing I think I need to do better is communicate to them the benefits of environmental and benefits of restoring and protecting the environment in Orkney, because it's very much economic development driven at the moment.
And a real opportunity, hopefully, in local strategies as well. So I think I really see that clearly where I'm sat. Chloe.
Going back to what you two were saying, I think you're both right, and I think actually the politicians kind of just need to come in at the end, don't they? And we're doing a whole lot of work on marine planning and prioritisation, everything everyone's talked about. You know, I feel like we're kind of taking it into our own hands a little bit, and, you know, doing engagement and thinking about prioritisation. And yes, we need the politicians, you're absolutely right, to come in and make those decisions. But there's a lot we can do. You know, in Wales, we're kind of feeding into a process, as I outlined. Welsh Government are starting to add that prescription to the existing spatial plan, that we have a lot of tools already that we can use to flesh out. So, yeah, I think we don't have to wait. I think there's a lot we can do in the meantime between ourselves.
Leave them with a good narrative to sell the
and
electorate,
that's easier, you know. We can give them the answers on a plate, and then they just have to sign it off.
Honest, easy, right. I hate this session. Sarah.
Yeah. So I also totally agree that we really do need strategic long-term vision from government and clarity in that, 100%. But around whose role is it to prioritise? I think that's a more tricky question that is open to a bit more debate. So in answer to the question, I think one thing that would really help is if the various organisations representing the various stakeholders, all with competing claims over the sea, could actually get together a bit more regularly and have a bit more constructive debate and try and agree what those priorities should be amongst themselves, as difficult as that will be. At least have the debate. It's the debate that's really important. And a collective statement or vision and set of areas that you can agree on. And you can have priorities that you don't agree on, but if you can produce that and speak with a collective voice, you're likely to have much more impact in terms of influencing politicians.
Can I jump in?
I'll jump to Simone. Go, Jen. Very aware that
Here's what I made earlier. That's exactly what we were aiming to do with the workshops that we held. We have this statement with stop,
Yeah, we really need to stop.
Yeah, but no, that's
but
what we were
think-
aiming to do.
I
It's
think
great.
there's a really
Let's see how
important
far we
point
get
there,
with it.
though, and we're back
Sorry.
right again to like who is in the room and who is not in the room. So when age statements are made, like who is here. So I promise I'm only going to be 1 minute, Dickon. I promised Natasha I would try and bring back some of the inclusivity theme from yesterday. And given, I think, the challenges of this session in particular, working across scales of space and time and equity and all sorts of things, I really wanted to look at the role that we in the room can play and what we can take back out of the room with us. I think we can bring more people into the room. We are the people that are networked globally and can act locally. We can go and get the right people to bring into the room with us. I was also at a workshop earlier this week, and a young researcher, we're looking at a project looking at helping communities through transitions in the face of climate change. The ECR introduced herself. I'm going blah, blah, I'm Professor, blah, blah, I do whatever. Might get my title changed to that at some point in the future. Watch this space. She chose to say, my name is Amma, I am undisciplined. She did not define herself by discipline, and I think that's what we need to get ourselves out of our boxes and working in the space where we can bring people together. So I'd just like to finish with an invite to all of you to thank the panel and make a resolution, I think, to be joyfully undisciplined together as we're helping people work across these boundaries in some really difficult spaces. Thank you very much, speakers.